What's up, Ragin Nation? This is Alex. You're watching the Ragin Ronin review, and it is time to review The Dark Knight Rises. The Dark Knight Rises is a movie that I saw on the midnight showing and also the Wednesday after that. The story takes place 8 years since the events of The Dark Knight. Bruce Wayne is in hiding. The same with Batman, especially since he took the fall for Harvey Dent's death. And the crime has been down since the Harvey Dent Act, and Batman's presence is not really needed anymore. But here comes a new villain, and that is Bane, who is no ordinary villain. He starts off terrorizing Gotham, and so Batman eventually comes out of hiding. And then not only is Bane introduced to the game, you have a mysterious character by the name of Selina Kyle, who we know in the Batman mythology as Catwoman. We first get to know her as a cat burglar, but later on we find out that she has something more to her. You know, she has her own little agenda, and she gets mixed up between Batman and Bane's affairs. So, in its simplest form, Batman has been gone for a long time, and then there's a new villain in town. That is the reason why Batman needs to come back and restore the peace in Gotham. And that's all you need to know from a Batman movie. We got a good guy, we got a bad guy, and boom, they duke it out. But it's never as simple as that, because we're talking about a Christopher Nolan movie. But before I get into that, let's talk about some of the characters. Bruce Wayne, Batman, is played by Christian Bale, and I always felt kind of neutral about Christian Bale playing Bruce Wayne and Batman, but I think I like him the most in this third installment, and it's mainly because we're reminded of some of the themes that were introduced in Batman Begins, and that is fear. And the fact is that Batman is a character with great resources and is still very vulnerable, and that is to fear. His weakness from the very first movie, Batman Begins. In the second movie, The Dark Knight, the theme was chaos, and it was the Joker who was able to outsmart Batman and was always one step ahead of him. But in Rises, you can see that Batman's weaknesses can be traced back to his roots, and it is actually very believable, and that part is because of the storytelling, and the other part is because of Christian Bale's performance. And then we got Alfred, played by Michael Caine, who is always a delight to watch because of his portrayal of the character. He brings in more emotion into the character this time around following the events of The Dark Knight. Lucius Fox, played by Morgan Freeman, is always a fun character to see on screen. He's got this charm that kind of makes him so likable, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that when Christian Bale goes out to see him, he always has a new gadget for him to play with. It's kind of like Q in the James Bond series, and his role in the Batman series is actually very crucial. Whenever he shows Bruce Wayne a new toy, we as the audience can't help but smile as we think about what Bruce Wayne is going to use that for in the movie later on. And then there's Jim Gordon, played by Gary Oldman, who I have to say is my favorite character in the entire trilogy. He's my favorite because I feel the determination to get things done and getting the city cleaned up. He's been wanting to do this for 3 movies, and what makes things unstable is that he has to trust a vigilante whom he doesn't really know a whole lot about. He gets himself into ugly situations, but he does so with such leadership, and while Batman is the lead character in the film, I think Batman wouldn't be the same without Jim Gordon. Now let's talk about some of the new characters. We got Miranda Tate, played by Mariam Cotillard, I think that's how you pronounce her name, and I really enjoyed her performance in Inception, also directed by Christopher Nolan. I feel that her character in Rises and Inception are very similar, and thus it made her being perfectly casted, because out of all the new characters in this movie, a lot of us are wondering, what exactly is her role in the story? We also have John Blake, played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and JGL is one of my favorite actors. John Blake is a young cop that gets a bit ahead of himself, and he asks a lot of questions for a cop, and because of that, it gets the attention of Bruce Wayne and Jim Gordon, thus making him a great ally to their team. He's kind of like the guy who just wants to help, but his superiors don't give him that opportunity to do so. So because of that, he just does it anyways. And that is why we as an audience like characters like that, because they decide to do things that are outside of the box. And now this brings us to Selina Kyle, played by Anne Hathaway. And I really gotta admit that I wasn't too thrilled about the fact that Anne Hathaway was casted as Selina Kyle, but as the movie progressed, I gotta say that she really does do justice to the character. Selina Kyle in Rises is a very mysterious character, and in fact, she's the type of character that you want to see more of. Selina Kyle is a cat burglar who is looking for a new beginning, and in doing so, she gets herself involved with both sides. And that's what makes this character very intriguing, because you don't know what's going on in her mind, and you really don't know whether or not you should root for her. In Batman Returns, Michelle Pfeiffer set the benchmark for Catwoman, and people say that she is the best Catwoman. Well, I agree with that to a certain point. I personally feel that Anne Hathaway did justice to Michelle Pfeiffer's portrayal of Catwoman by being as close to her personality as possible, but she added more to it, and a huge part of that has to do with that her personal story was a lot more mysterious. Michelle Pfeiffer's version was more bent on revenge, so there's really nothing mysterious about that, but the Anne Hathaway version is that and so much more. Her sassy personality is all there, but not only that, we also get a great display of her physical abilities. And because of that, she's the type of character that I wish I saw more of in the movie. And finally, there's Bane, who's played by Tom Hardy, who is just a scary villain to be in the presence of. There's going to be a constant comparison between who's the better villain, Joker or Bane. Joker is a very psychotic and intelligent villain, and he fights Batman with his twisted wits. Bane, on the other hand, is not only an intelligent villain, but while Joker excels in his unpredictability, Bane makes up for with his sheer strength and screen presence. Whenever he is on screen, he creates fear. You do not want to be in the same room as him. Not only did they make him an intelligent villain, but one who can really put fear in all, including Batman. He is someone who really doesn't think of Batman as any importance to him. When you watch him on screen, you see that he's got bigger plans, like destroying an entire city, and he could care less about masked vigilantes. Tom Hardy, who was great in Inception, is once again great in Rises because he plays the part so well that you don't even know that it is him. His physique, voice, and overall presentation is completely transformed to make him believable as the classic villain. As you can see, this is a solid lineup of characters backed up by a solid cast. It does not get any better than this. Let's talk about Christopher Nolan's direction. I've seen all of Nolan's feature films, and what can I say? The guy's a filmmaking genius. It's quite a flawless track record, and the way he does it is with intelligent storytelling. Even if it's just a battle between good and evil, he puts forth the question, how can we make it so that it is much more than just a battle between good and evil? And that's what makes us all want to see a Christopher Nolan directed Batman film. With regards to the direction of The Dark Knight Rises, I find that the direction is very progressive. It starts off with a bang, but after that, it continues at a very gradual pace. It starts off slow, but then it picks up the pace as the movie progresses up to the final act of the film, where it's just completely nuts and is one of the most entertaining action set pieces in a comic book movie aside from The Avengers. If you've seen The Dark Knight and Inception, you know what to expect in terms of how the movie is structured. Christopher Nolan movies have a lot of material to cover in them, and because of that, there are movies that require you to think. He does his best to cram in as much information as he can, and he does this without making it too bloated. For example, every single scene, whether it's a 10-second character insert or a 4-minute dialogue sequence, serves a purpose in the story. Even if it's just a little tiny little detail, like a character looking at a computer, he puts that in a scene with another scene that already has a dialogue narrative within it, so that it keeps the beat of the moving flowing at a constant pace without slowing the movie down. This movie is expertly paced. Even slow scenes do not last a long time because the dialogue engages the audience with dramatic performances from his actors, thus making them all a pleasure to watch on screen without losing us. This movie is nearly 3 hours long, but never once did I feel the need to look at my watch because it flowed like a 2-hour movie. Another thing that I liked about Christopher Nolan's direction is his attention to detail. There are so many little minute details that he just throws into the movie, not only to serve the story, but because it is something for the fandom as well. The Batman universe is a character that has been celebrated for many years, and thus it will have a very rich history of events, and it feels like Nolan as a writer and a director made sure that he gave fans something that would not only just make them happy, but would also blend well with the Nolan/Batman universe. As we already know, the Nolan Batman universe is a very reality-based world, and so when I heard about Selina Kyle being in The Dark Knight Rises, I was thinking, how and why the hell would a woman dress up like a cat? Well, let's just say that every inch of the costume that Anne Hathaway puts on is very practical, and she still can look like Catwoman. What I like the most about The Dark Knight Rises is that we can see a complete story arc. It is almost like Nolan planned The Dark Knight Rises as a trilogy originally, as he knew how it was going to end. In the Matrix trilogy, each installment had its own theme. The first one was birth, the second one was life, and the third one was death. Nolan follows the same kind of formula. Begins was birth. The Dark Knight was life and death, and Rises is rebirth. Or rather, New Beginnings would be more of an accurate description, because in Rises, Nolan brings us back to where our main character began, and to the themes of fear and why Batman, or rather Bruce Wayne's ultimate challenge to himself has always been to conquer fear. It's an inner demon that he's been trying to conquer, and Rises is a story where the circle completes itself. And this is not just a movie about new beginnings for Bruce Wayne, but also for other characters in the movie, including Gotham City. If you don't already realize it, by the time you watch Rises, you will realize how Gotham City is just as much a character, much like any of the characters in this movie. They talk about Gotham in the third person as if they were talking about a person that needs to be rescued and one with emotions. And I think that Nolan meant to do this because he wanted the struggle between good and evil to be that much more important to Batman and Jim Gordon. It wasn't just about saving people, but also saving Gotham as a whole and what it represented. At the end of the day, this is a comic book movie and it's about good and evil, but when you put Christopher Nolan at the helm, he makes it just so much more. And with this being the third installment in the trilogy, he had to ask himself, how can we make it better? And came up with the answer, and that all he really wanted to do was take all the elements that made the second one so awesome, which was the story and the characters, and up the ante on the visual aspect of the film. And this brings me to talk about the action in this film, and the action is wah! We start off with Bane's introduction, and that scene really sets the tone for the movie. Much like how Joker's bank robbery sequence showed us how the Joker really is. That plane hijacking sequence is something like you've never seen before. And Nolan's action sense is so innovative, and he tries to make his action not only look cool and aggressive, but he wants them to look grand in scale. And there's a lot of action in this movie. Almost every action sequence is a big sequence. It's not like some movies where they only have 2 big action sequences and a bunch of small ones. From hand-to-hand combats to awesome vehicle pursuits, Christopher Nolan's action sequences are exciting and precise in stimulating our visual senses. One thing that we can't deny is that Batman is not a superhero. He's a vigilante in an armor suit with many resources and physical training, but he can't fly, does not have superhuman strength, and is not an acrobatic expert. And when it comes to combat, Bane presents himself as a brawler that is not to be messed with. The fight between Bane and Batman brings us back to the old school brawling, which is something that I have to commend Christopher Nolan for. In a world where audiences have been treated to over-choreographed sequences of martial arts and hand-to-hand combat with sharp editing, I'm glad that Nolan can bring us some good old brawling where 2 guys just go at it. It's simple but effective, and what is great about it is that it's not something that you find is fun to watch. It is brutal and raw. They're not jumping around and they're not blocking each other and counter-punching every other hit. They are taking hits like men and without the use of additional sound effects. Bane unleashes his power, and it presents not only a physical challenge for Batman, but a very emotional one as well. It's almost like the fight scene tells a story within themselves about their characters, and each shot is directed with such expertise. Now let's talk about the music in The Dark Knight Rises. The music is composed by Hans Zimmer, who has collaborated with Nolan in all 3 Batman films and Inception, and if you have Hans Zimmer scoring your movie has an extra shot at being nothing short of being epic, because that is what Hans Zimmer does. The Batman scores have recurring musical themes, so he doesn't mess around with that because the fans all recognize them, and what he will do is tweak them just a little bit to sell the scene more effectively based on the tone of each scene. So while he's got those themes in, he will create brand new musical pieces for new characters. Also, another thing that Hans Zimmer does in all of the Christopher Nolan directed Batman films is that he composes new scores for each of the different love interests in each Batman film. And by doing that, he adds a sense of freshness to the overall score of the film so that we are treated to some new material in its ongoing franchise. But ultimately, the Batman theme is left untouched, as it is already and has always been perfect and very fitting. I've said so many good things about this movie, but still, there are some things that could be improved. Okay, let's just talk about some things that I personally consider as flaws. Now, this is just a little bit of nitpicking. This doesn't completely affect the overall score of the film. The first thing I gotta mention is that there's not enough Catwoman. Selena Kyle doesn't appear as much as I would want her to appear because she's a very interesting character and I want to see more of her. Batman is just Batman in this movie, and he's always been Batman for all 3 films, and he hasn't really changed that much in the progressing franchise. But we do see a lot of Bruce Wayne in this movie. In fact, Bruce Wayne gets a lot of screen time. I guess it's kind of a good thing because we learn more about Bruce Wayne as a character. One of the main things that I felt that made The Dark Knight Rises less like a Batman film was that there are not enough gadgets, not enough detective work, and there's not enough bat flight. These are some things that define who Batman is as a character. He has all kinds of gadgets and little weapons that he uses at his disposal, such as the grappling hook, and he does a lot of detective work. He climbs around buildings and he listens with these listening devices. We didn't see a whole lot of that. And another thing that makes Batman very iconic is bat flight. He spreads out his cape and he flies through cities. That is something that we did not see at all in The Dark Knight Rises. When you really think about it, the storytelling structure of The Dark Knight Rises is almost identical to The Dark Knight. And because of that, it really is almost the same movie but told in a different way. But still, the movie is very epic. I personally score The Dark Knight Rises as 9.25 out of 10 because I feel they are nearly the same movie, but by being the same, you can't score them the same because the predecessor, which I gave a 9.5 out of 10 to, was the first one with that concept. The Dark Knight gets 9.5, The Dark Knight Rises gets 9.25 out of 10. So when you really think about it, all they could have really done was increase the level of action in the movie, which they did. We've seen Batman in the previous 2 movies, and he doesn't develop to become any stronger. So what do? They make him weaker, and they make Bruce Wayne stronger, which is what I think is a very appropriate move. And that's all I have to say about this movie. One of the things that makes a movie good is, of course, its very lasting impression that it leaves with us. And let me tell you, the way the movie ends is just freaking epic. A lot of people throw that term around, but I don't think they genuinely understand what the meaning of epic really is. Transformers is not epic. It is fun. Avengers is kind of epic, but Avengers is more awesome than it is epic. The Dark Knight Rises, on the other hand, is epic. With that being said, I give Rises a 9.25 out of 10. The Dark Knight is still the best one out of the 3 at 9.5 out of 10 because all it needed was a brand new concept with a very memorable villain. Rises borrowed the same concept of the second one and had a memorable villain, and they increased the action of the movie. And in my books, upping the action on a movie doesn't necessarily make a movie that much greater unless you have a great and original story. By the way, catch this movie in IMAX. It's a must-see in IMAX. And that's all I have to say. 9.25 out of 10. If you enjoyed this review, hit that like button, subscribe to my YouTube channel, like me on Facebook, The Ragin Nation, and also follow me on Twitter, @Ragin Nation. My name is Alex Yu, and thanks for watching the Ragin Ronin review. I'll see you next time. Peace. As we